All right. So I believe I'm on air now. Okay. I'm gonna do a quick stream on white privilege. Basically, stream going over what is white privilege. Does it actually exist? Just a bunch of stuff here, and we'll get into that. You might notice that I almost have a mustache right now, and during the football season, I actually grow a mustache while my team is winning, which is the South Carolina Gamecocks. Um, and they got the crap beat out of them on Saturday by Georgia. So that's going to be going away, and I may have one later on. It depends on if we decide to suck this year. So Um, anyways, oh, and I also get complaints that I do these like laying across my bed, and that I should find somewhere better to do them. Yeah, I might eventually, but eh. Anyways, so white privilege. White privilege essentially is the idea that white people have a certain amount of privilege in our society that basically they don't have to work as hard for certain things. Um, and honestly, it's really fallacious to call it white privilege, and I'll go into that later on. But the idea that white people are just given certain things because they're white is utterly ridiculous. Uh, as a white person, I can tell you I don't have any privilege. I am not privileged. My life actually kind of sucks, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not here to make any sort of you know Olympics out of how crappy our lives are. I'm sure there are plenty of you out there who have equally crappy lives. Anyways, so basically, we said what right privilege is supposed to be. The idea that you have certain privileges um, because you're white. The reason it doesn't exist, or at least it's a fallacious argument to call it that, is not all white people have those privileges. Honestly, if you really look at it, the things that people typically say are, quote, white privilege, they're really more of rich white people privilege. And to an extent, wealthy, black people would have the same privileges. It's really privilege that's given to you based on how much money you make. Um, so, honestly, obviously, if it's not apparent to you, somebody who grows up in a poor household or a broken household, broken family, they're going to have a harder time. That's just how it works. Um, so yeah. It really doesn't exist as a privilege. I would like to go into what people perceive as white privilege, what it actually is, because honestly, what they're getting at is minority disprivilege, underprivilege, and you might look at that and say, well, those, that's the same thing. You're just playing semantics. It's really not the same thing because of what you would do to fix it. Um, if I told you that somebody had a privilege over someone else, what's the best way to fix that privilege? Well, you take the privilege away, right? That's what you would do. Um, but if I told you that somebody, was underprivileged, or, that somebody didn't have what everyone else had in terms of what they needed to succeed, what would the answer be to you to how to fix that? Well, you would say, well, let's get them up to the level of everyone else, right? Because we want everyone to, be on that equal playing field. And so the reason I would say that it's minority disprivileged, underprivileged, they're underprivileged. It has a lot to do with how minorities are set up in our society. And when you look at it, they're really not set up to succeed. And nobody seems to give a crap about it. Nobody seems to, they don't really understand the issue. And because they don't understand the issue, they can't fix it. I mean, you can't fix something where you haven't actually identified what the problem is. Um, a lot of times, what I see people saying is that we've got things like affirmative action. We've got things like scholarships specifically for minorities to get into college, and I always look at it and I say, you've kind of already screwed them over by that point. And so, affirmative action, your college scholarships specifically for minorities, they're not really helping. They don't help. They can't help. Why can't they help? Most minorities go to really pretty crummy high schools. They also went to crummy middle schools. They also went to crummy elementary schools. And so you say to yourself, okay, well, you had to endure all of that crap. Now we're just going to give you basically free money to go to college, but they never were set up to succeed in college. That's why you see a lot of minorities, they'll get these scholarships and then they'll have to drop out of college. Why? Because they never were really taught how to write a paper properly, or basically anything that you were supposed to have learned when you were in high school. They didn't get taught those things, or at least they didn't get taught them very well. Um, and so, I mean, it doesn't guarantee that a minority is going to fail when they get one of these scholarships. Every person is capable of overcoming their circumstances with enough drive, but it makes it a lot more difficult. They are disprivileged. They didn't have what everyone else had. That's what I'm kind of trying to get at with this. So really, the proper answer to how to fix things like this is to start off at the lowest level. Start off with the elementary schools. Make sure they're not going to crappy elementary schools. If that elementary school has been sitting there for the past 70 years, it's probably not, I mean, it probably needs to be replaced. If they're going to a place where the roofs leak, or they don't have heat in the winter or air conditioning in the summer, we probably should do something about that. And really, we need to move away from where we've gotten to now and back to an idea of achievement in schools. And this is not a problem that's just present in minority schools. It's present in schools across the board, that you can't fail students, or you can't tell a student that they didn't learn what they were supposed to learn, because sometimes that's true. Um, and this idea of just passing people along through the grades just because they're getting older, that's just not a good idea. If you just pass them along, then if they don't learn the material, they don't learn the material. They're not prepared for later on. You have to make sure that your elementary school is preparing the kids to be in middle school, that the middle school is then preparing those kids to be in high school, and that the high school is preparing those kids to be in college. Now, of course, I do realize that not everyone will go to college, and not everyone needs to, based on what they want to do with their lives. Um, but if the idea is that high school should prepare you for college, we need to actually do it, and we need to make sure that we're doing it in the minority communities, which means investing more heavily in those elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, for minorities. Um, so that's really the answer to what ought to be done. I think one of the major problems that we see with people spouting off about white privilege, um, they use it more as I've heard people talk about it as a cudgel or something like that. I don't agree with that. It's more like an axe, as an axe to just chop off any conversation where you don't understand because you're white. That's wonderful, man. There are plenty of things I understand. Do I know what it's like to be to have someone hate you because of your race? No, but I do know what it's like to have someone hate you. Um, do I know what it's like to be thought less of just because of the color of your skin? No, I don't. But I do know what it's like to have people look at you and make assumptions about you. Now, those may not be exactly the same thing. Obviously, somebody looking at me and assuming that I'm a nerd or whatever it is they assume. Um, because honestly, I don't even really care what people have to say about how I look. But whatever it is that you could look at me and say, I think this about you. Uh, Hi, Kitty. She jumped there. I don't know what's wrong with her. Anyways, um, so no, I don't assume that those are the same thing, but they are related. And one of the things I say, I worked with somebody one time, and I was telling them about this, and they told me, quote, that I couldn't talk about it because I didn't know what it was like. By the way, what I was saying was ways that I felt like we could help make people more equal. You know, it's not exactly a bad thing to talk about. It's not exactly an inappropriate thing to talk about. Just ways that I thought we could do better with diversity and equality, or at least getting rid of inequality. So you don't understand. You'll never understand because you're white. I said, I've never been in a car accident before, at least not a serious one. Um, I've never run over, a pedestrian or been run over. I don't know what those are like. I like the worst car accidents I've ever been in were like fender benders, or I I ran into someone who pulled out in front of me one time. It really wasn't bad. Um, that doesn't mean if I am driving down the road and I see somebody who has gotten into a car accident, or I see a pedestrian that got hit or something like that, that I'm not going to stop and try to help them, you know, if I can. I may not be able to. It all just depends. Um, I mean, if I see a person who got hit and has a broken leg, I might be able to help them. If I see somebody who got hit and is, barely breathing and barely alive, about the only help I'm going to be able to give them is to call the paramedics. But um, that doesn't mean I wouldn't try to help, Um, but my main point is I don't know what it's like to be those people. Never been there, never had it happen to me. That doesn't mean that I can't see something that concerns me and be upset about it and formulate my own ideas about how we might ought to address that. Um, um, but yeah, that's really what I'm getting at with that. I mean, a lot of people use this as just to shut down any kind of argument or any sort of debate about it, and to me, that seems utterly ridiculous. Um, I think the thing that bothers me the most is if we're going to go this way of you can't understand how it is to be X because you're not X, then none of us understand each other because none of us are the same. We're all different. We all have our differences. It'd be like saying, I was talking about religion or something. I'm currently Lutheran. Was raised Presbyterian. Um, Never been Baptist. Okay, just never been Baptist. I'm talking to a guy who's Baptist. Well, you don't understand because you're not Baptist. Um, Lutheran. It's not that different, you know. Um, when we get to things dealing with privilege, I'm a person. At least I hope you think I'm a person, but I am. I am. I'm a person. And so things that happen to people, discrimination, prejudice, they've happened to me, you know. People have assumed things about me because of how I look. They've assumed things about me because of how I act. Um, People have assumed things about me because of who I voted for before. FYI, in the last election, I didn't vote for anybody. Didn't really want to. Um, but people have assumed things about me because of the way I voted. I had somebody tell me that I was a racist when I voted for both Mitt Romney and I voted for John McCain because I just didn't want to vote for Barack Obama because he was black. I can give a crap if he's black. I really had thought seriously about voting for not Herman Cain. I'm trying to remember who the it mhm. Ben Carson. That's who it was in the last election. Um, and I thought seriously about voting for him based on his kind of ideological beliefs up until I heard him start talking about the actual issues and kind of decided for myself that he didn't really know much about them. The thing for Barack Obama, who I also actually considered very heavily voting for in 2008, um, he was kind of the opposite. I didn't really agree with him ideologically, but he seemed very intelligent. Um, but once it got into the actual meat of the issues, I disagreed with him on all of what he wanted to do. Um, but I suppose that ought to have been apparent from having a pretty decent idea what his ideology was beforehand. But to be honest, sometimes you do see politicians that, even though their ideology would say, no, I should do this, they'll say, I feel like it's best to do, instead of doing X, I'll do Y because Y is what most people would want, what most people would want to do. And I'm not running to, force people into my way of thinking, but I would like to have it considered more, and I would like to move Y closer to X. Now, a lot of times you do see that with politicians. That's really what I was thinking of with Barack Obama and why I had considered voting for him. But yeah, I was told I was a racist. Yeah, that's really right. I mean, I don't agree with the guy. What did you want me to do? I'm not going to vote for someone that I don't think is going to do the job that I want them to do. It also doesn't mean that when Barack Obama was elected that I wanted him to do a bad job. He did a bad job, but that's really an issue for another video. Um, but no, I mean, both times, the first time he was elected and the second time when he was reelected, um, I posted on Facebook. I know the second time, but I at least thought it the first time. But I posted on Facebook the second time, just this long post about how I hoped he succeeded because I did. I'm not looking for people to fail. I don't want the president of the United States to fail. That would never be good. That doesn't help anybody. Anyways, I've kind of digressed and gotten away from the main topic here, which was white privilege. But yeah, I mean, there are two different ways that I really see it used, and neither of them are correct because of what they're trying to do. Either it's used as an axe to get people to just shut up, which I don't think is correct. I've discussed why. Or the other reason goes back to that original definition that I gave for privilege versus, you know, underprivilege, what you would do to correct those. The other reason I see it used is you do have people out there who their idea is let's get rid of white privilege. Let's make so, I mean, you have some really bad things that minorities have to go through. some real problems with their community that are a lot of people would say, oh, well, that's their fault. I don't believe that it's their fault. That's not my opinion on it. But regardless of whether or not you believe it's their fault, there are things that really ought to be different, ought to be fixed. The people who really like white privilege also tend to like the idea that instead of fixing the problems that exist in the minority communities, what we ought to be doing instead is making sure that everybody's life just sucks equally bad, that everybody has just as hard a time, that everybody finds it just as difficult to get a job, or everybody has, just a crummy education growing up. Um, they don't come out and say that. They're not going to come out and say that, mind you. But that's what they're gearing towards. That's what they want. Um, to me, that's a terrible idea. That's a horrible idea. We ought to be bringing the minority community up, trying to make their community better. And I say that, and some people are going to say, "Oh, well, you don't know what's going to be better for their community." Well, there are certain things that I know are going to be better. If less minorities are getting murdered every year, I consider that better. If you don't consider that better, well, I make the suggestion that I'm not the one who's not human. Maybe it's you, but the other things, a lot of black families are actually single mother families. And this is nothing against single mothers. This is not blaming anything on them. That's not what this is geared towards. But it would be better if more minorities could have an actual family as they're growing up. I feel like there are certain things that the government does to encourage them not to have a family. Um, and not necessarily just talking about with um, what is it called, welfare, with welfare, but that's part of the issue. But there are things both encoded in law that encourage there not to be an actual family unit put together, and there are things that are encouraged by society as well. Um, and both of those really have to be solved now. It's easier to solve the legal side of it than it is to solve the societal side of it, because society only changes when it decides to change, But it most certainly is easier to actually fix the legal side of it, because the legal side changes just as soon as politicians pull their heads out of their rear ends and actually do something. Um, and I'll probably do a video later on at some point about why politicians never do anything, because there is a specific reason, and it's mostly like everything with politics, it's about getting reelected. But uh, anyways, so yeah, I'd like to know what people think. I'm not sure if this qualifies as a rant or not, but if so, I'm sorry that I ranted for so long. Um, but yeah, I want to know what your thoughts are on white privilege, and whether or not you feel like, honestly, what is it that you think you would like to see done to fix? If you do agree with white privilege, you think that's a thing. What would you like to see done to fix it? Because a lot of times what I hear is just know that you're privileged, and that'll fix it. And I'm like, crap, does that mean? I mean, knowing that something's a problem does not fix it. There are a lot of freaking problems out there. Not a one of them has ever been fixed just by knowing that it's a problem. But I hear that a lot. So again, if you do think that white privilege is a thing, I'd like to know, what do you think ought to be done to fix it. Again, like I've said, I do agree that minorities have a tougher time. I don't look at it as privilege. I look at it as underprivileged, i.e., we need to help move minorities up to the same level as everyone else rather than try to make everyone else, come down to a point where everyone is more equal, but everyone's life sucks worse. So yeah, let me know. Take it easy. Later.